Welcome to this video tutorial. It is for those who are taking the course in scientific writing. We are going to be looking at this topic, writing the concept note for a public health research. The objective set out is here identified and listed. By the end of this module, students will be able to understand the rationale for preparing the concept note for research proposal. 2, considering the topic and the title for the proposal or proposed study, addressing the problem to be investigated and adequately. Now, analyzing the underpinning dynamics with the most appropriate theoretical and conceptual principle. And lastly, thoughtfully develop the concept note appropriately. So we're going to go through these, and these are the objectives that you should be aiming at as competence you're going to derive from this particular module. Understand the rationale for the why. Why do you do a concept note and how do you do it? Considering the topic and identifying that there's a difference between topic and a title. This we'll be able to discuss this here. Addressing the problem phenomenon. How do you identify the problem, and how do you investigate that problem adequately? So these are the objectives. So let's go into the lecture. We'll start with the first objective. What's the purpose of a concept note? Now, the concept note is part of the proposal. In fact, you start with the concept note, then you now propose. Okay, so the concept note precedes the proposal to be developed for the study. And the proposal is just like a feasibility study. You want to identify whether the study, the research is feasible. And remember, we have said this. The reason for conducting research is to provide answers. That is why we do research, is to understand the dynamics of natural phenomena. All right. So the understanding builds up. What we know about nature builds up step by step, stage by stage. From one research to another, we accumulate such information and knowledge about things that are happening around us. And that is why we write research. And how do we do it? This study, this subject, and this course will also teach us how we do this. And that's what we mean by scientific writing. How do we write research? How do we conduct research? How do we do research? All right. So the proposal that you are going to be proposing for your study will serve as a feasibility study, which requires a strong foundation. You need to have a very strong foundation, convincing argument to be able to proceed to write a successful research. Because of this, it is necessary for a concept note to be conceived. Okay, so the concept note is the first mapping out of your research engagement. So a concept note is most appropriate starting point. And why do we do this? Because it gives us opportunity to put together all the resources that we need, all the resources, all the scientific resources, conceive how they connect, the coherence, how do you establish coherence, how do you plan to establish a proof of concept. They are all within the concept note, and that's why it's important we start with concept notes. The concept note outlines the core idea of the proposal. So whatever the proposal is going to look like, the concept note is already engaging in putting it together. So a structural review of what to do and why you do it is what the concept note is about. It's not a long thing. It's not very, very long, but it's important. Short 1 to 2 pages. And there is a structured way that we need to follow it up. The concept note also articulates the problem phenomenon, identifies it, and also rationale and purpose for the solution that you want to achieve. It has to be precisely stated. What is the purpose? What is the solution? What the nature of the solution? And so when you do research, we expect three types of solution, and they define the order of your research. So the three orders of research: first order, second order, and third order. With the first order is technology, how you translate research solution into technology that solves human problem. Then you have the second order, where you conduct an intervention. All right, you conduct an intervention, an experiment to see whether your treatment is good and will solve. Then the third order is when you conduct research that will provide some answers or some understanding of natural phenomena. All right, so your concept note is the very first attempt to put all of these together so that you can have either the first order, second order, and third order solution. So the concept note also is a test of feasibility of the proposed study. When we talk about topics and titles for our research, proposed research, I want to just make a clarification here. Whenever you say topic, you're referring to the general subject area in which that research is supposed to be domiciled. So the research is addressing issues pertaining to a particular field of studies in public health or any other field of study. But then the title is usually the name that you have given to the specific research you want to conduct. All right, so the title is different. Sometimes we interchange topics with titles. They know they are separate entities, all right, referring to separate phenomena. The problem phenomenon drives the study. Hence, appropriate consideration should be given selection of the topic, the subject area, and then the title framing to reflect the underpinning concept. You must be careful when you're choosing a subject area to do. A subject area would be defined by whatever is missing in previous study, and that is where the lead is. Whatever is missing in previous study, which sometimes we refer to as gaps, but I prefer using deficiencies in previous studies. Very important issues that previous studies did not address fully. They ought to have addressed fully. Either they started off and they lost track of. So those becomes the flaws in those previous studies or deficiencies in those previous studies that requires repetition of that study. Now, as a test of feasibility of the study, writing the concept note helps to establish what the idea proposed is, whether the idea proposed is practical and researchable. Feasibility means, is this engagement project, is it likely to conclude properly as expected? That is what feasibility. If it is, then it is feasible. You can engage in it knowing that you have an end point that is expected. And sometimes when the study is not well structured and thought of, it may not end well. All right, so the topic refers to the subject domain, while the title refers to a statement describing the variables involved, the likely study design, and population and location where the study is to be conducted. Problem to be investigated requires serious consideration. Sometimes the problem manifests itself as symptoms, but the deep reason for such observed phenomenon, which sometimes we refer to as problem, whereas they are not problem, they are simply symptoms demonstrating the presence of some underlying challenges. So consider the major observed concern warranting this study. The problem is really deep. And if it is disease related, the disease is not the problem. The problem is why the disease persists, despite there are very effective clinical interventions that are preventive interventions. So that is how we find out what problems are. A problem is not the disease. This disease is the symptoms of a problem. And so you need to go beyond the disease. All right. The disease is usually consequences of the presence of some issues that have not been properly addressed. Now, emerging questions from the problem phenomenon is the next. So for every problem, there are questions that really emerge from them. So all of these are issues that help us to situate what the problem is so that we are not wasting our time with symptoms. We need to address why the symptoms are. The theoretical and conceptual underpinning of the problem phenomenon that may be involved is an important aspect that the concept note should address. So how may this be achieved? Well, theoretical principles are there in public health, behavioral theories are there, and any study that lacks behavioral theories and conceptual issues is superficial and mere speculation. Literature review outline may be relevant as conceptual framework to guide the structuring of your proposed study. So we have the protocol, research protocol under the literature review, which we'll be considering in the next module in week 4. We'll see how literature review is done. Why do we do literature review? How? So in the structuring of your proposed study, after concept notes, begin to structure your proposal. The literature review is important and usually it's the first to start off with. Okay, so let's quickly look at the concept notes. Let's look at the concept note, how it helps us to develop our proposal. So I would stop sharing this. So we move on to the concept notes. Let me quickly share the actual concept note that you have in your. So this concept notes, I'll walk you through the concept notes templates so that you'll be able to use them when you download them. So the concept note begins with it. Look at the concept note, it's a form. The template is the form. So you read these questions here in bold print, and then you answer them in the form. So they are straightforward, supposed to be a brief, not detailed. So it gives you an idea of where you are going. So let's quickly look at some of the points here. So it asks questions about the problem. What are the major observed concerns warranting this study? So usually it's a problem. And the problem is not the symptom, is why the symptoms persist. All right. So it will ask you the question, you would think about it because you are the one going to write this concept and research. So the title of your research will be here, properly framed. And then the next one says, are there theoretical and conceptual underpinning of the problem phenomena that may be involved? Usually there are. And every research that is conducted must have the scientific foundation which the theoretical and conceptual framework offers. Okay, this theoretical framework tries to explain the risk factors involved in any disease situation. All right, so in public health, it's easy. Those behavioral models will help you to explain the risk factor, modifiable risk factor. The non-modifiable risk factors are beyond anybody's control. They are things that we cannot change, and changing them may be very difficult. So the next question is, what literature review outline may be relevant as conceptual framework to guide the structuring of your proposed study? And before you get into this particular section of the concept note, these two video links, I would encourage you to watch them carefully and make notes. There are issues that may help you to identify how you do the literature review and summarize it here before you expand it in your proposals. Then this research design, we talked about cross-sectional most often for most levels. The observational studies, such as the cross-sectional survey, that are typical. Cohort studies are epidemiological, and the case control. Case studies are usually they are outdated now. We don't usually encourage case studies because they are rare. When rare conditions come, then you have case reports and case studies. Here is requesting that you provide brief explanation of the study argument warranting the study. Right? Usually when we talk about study argument, we're talking about the problem, question raised, the objectives, and then your hypothesis, research hypothesis. They form the argument, and then the justification, the reason for doing this study, and whatever is going to contribute. That's what we mean by justification or rationale and significance. You have to identify them. So what outcome do you intend to achieve? You write them out. Then the next question here says, are there specific objectives representing course of action to be taken or considered? Now, this is asking specifically for you to identify specific objectives that this study will follow to achieve its goals. The goals will be the main objective, and then the step-by-step course of action to take. Then the others follow. So we conclude with the right. So we conclude with the research. We've just done this, and then thank you for watching. We'll see next module 4. We'll talk about the literature review and how to do it. Thank you very much for watching. Bye-bye.